Welcome. This is Astrology Insight Now, a weekly forecast program with astrology and other ways to help you make the most of your week and to heighten confidence for daily life. It's run by Pamela Cuccinell, that's me, the astrologer, and I invite you to find out more about my work at insightoasis.com. I look forward to your joining us every week. Please share with your friends, and here we go. February 3rd, 2025. The moon is in the sign of Aries, and the times I give are Eastern time, so you might need to adjust depending where you live. With that moon in Aries, today is a rather challenging day pre-dawn. So that's until 5:19 a.m., again, Eastern time. Then the moon is void of course until 10:33 p.m. So that means the moon is void of course all day in the sign of Aries. So here's the thing with this. Pre-dawn, that Aries moon will make a picture in the sky, which is a square 90 degrees from our perspective to Mars, which is a retrograde. Mars is the planet linked to the sign of Aries. So it is not comfortable right now because Mars is retrograde, again, from our perspective. So what that means is that emotionally there's a thrust to move in certain directions, go forward, and yet there's a push-pull. There's a sense of move, stop. And with that retrograde, it's more stop than move. It's in the sign of Cancer, Mars is. So it's kind of testy. People can be cranky. Now, for people who are in Eastern time zone, they may be asleep. It may muddle dreams. They may wake up feeling like what just happened. But for people who may be different time zone, early risers, work at night, there can be some energy that feels frustrated, very, very high level of frustration. So if you're up and about, you just want to be aware that if somebody suddenly blows up or is angry, including yourself, this is a temporary condition. It may be a well-worn grievance that needs to be expressed, but it won't carry that heat for very long unless, of course, action is taken on it that one might regret or that is greater than perhaps was really warranted. So be aware of that. Once the moon is void of course, and what that means is it is not making any geometric aspects to another planetary heavenly body until it goes into the next sign. And so when that happens, people aren't as emotionally invested in the outcome. Needless to say, in the sign of Aries, however, there may be a real thrust of, I want to do this now, or I've been waiting a long time, or I want this to happen, or sudden movements in certain directions, spontaneous, out of nowhere, and yet not a lot of follow through on if it's going to come to pass or not. One of the pictures that comes into my mind when I think about this is someone who's very easily derailed. So a person who is seemingly going in one direction and then can be turned in another. For instance, I think of a dog that is barking or distracted and you pull out a treat and suddenly that's the thing of interest, or you throw the stuffy toy, whatever. But the ticket here is if someone seems very adamant or into something, they may just as quickly change course. And the emotional glue to follow through just isn't there. Unless, of course, it's making an aspect to a personal planet or on your horoscope or someone else's. And this could be magnifying that lunar sense of need or expression. There are some pictures in the sky that I'm looking at, especially in the late afternoon, that can show certain creativity, especially in expression, something that needs to be articulated. We can also understand better, perhaps, an old wound, especially if we're willing to go maybe a place that usually is too hard to enter or talk about. So it's not that nothing gets done when the moon is void, of course, but what usually is advisable is to work on things already in motion and basically know that most you wouldn't want to start a business or an enterprise or reach out to that very valuable person that you've been wanting to be a client for a while, or making an overture for a proposal that you've been wanting to pitch, because it just doesn't land the way you'd like it to when the moon is void, of course. And especially on a day like today when it's in the sign of Aries, because attention span is not high. So moon enters Taurus at 10:33 p.m. And this is when we're in the good cycle of being able to follow through and make things happen. It's coming off the energy of the new moon that happened last week. And so we can really stay in that high vibratory energy of creativity, spiritual mandate, higher octave of love. I mean, if what you're doing or working towards is really with good intention, this is a lovely period to be moving towards it. Encouraging other people to come your way right now. And I will talk about this continually throughout this year. But right now, as we're seeing such division in how people think and what their investments are with certain political camps or ways of being, it is more important than ever to find that kind of common ground, whatever it is. And with the moon in Taurus, it could be about breaking bread together. So that doesn't happen until late evening Eastern time on Monday, but then it basically informs the day on Tuesday, which is also when Jupiter goes direct. And when Jupiter goes direct, we are passing this cycle we've been in with the retrograde, which is people holding back funds, holding back a sense of optimism. If you've been feeling down or frustrated, and this is going to continue to lift as we get into late February, but especially March towards the equinox. But what this first shift with Jupiter going direct can indicate is a buoyancy returning, a sense of optimism, a sense of potential. And the retrograde, when it went retrograde, often what we look at is, well, when does it finally pass the point that it was at? And then we're totally free and clear of that retrograde energy. But in the case of Jupiter, especially for Jupiterian types, people who have a strong Jupiter, strong Sagittarius aspect, they're going to be feeling this sense of, at last I'm starting to move forward in directions and I can feel myself getting to places I really want to go and be in. And so with that coming forth, there can be a thaw that starts to occur in early February with people who were sort of frozen in space and saying, I don't know how to proceed next. Well, possibilities start to come in. And sharing of ideas. One of the things that's said about Jupiter when it's in the sign of Gemini is that when it's in the sign of Sagittarius, its opposite sign, it's in its rulership sign. So that's considered very auspicious. When it's in the sign of Gemini, the opposite sign, that's considered a bit negative because what's considered is energetically that person is a bit scattered. When you think about Jupiter, you're looking at the long overview, the big visions, and Gemini kind of pulls it down. I actually natally have Jupiter in Gemini, and I think one of the, well, from my opinion, since it is very strong in my horoscope, it's been one reason why I can look at a lot of different media. And long before the term multitasking came up, I tend to read actually a few books at once. It's not like I read several pieces of fiction at once, but I might have one piece of fiction and then a couple of other books that often are astrology books or philosophy or something like that. And I'm looking at them at the same time. Not unusual at all for Jupiter and Gemini type. It's that interest in, it's kind of, from my perspective, it's looking at the long view in a microcosm also. So bringing that long view into, okay, well, how does that pertain to my direct neighborhood? And so with that moving direct now, I think one of the things we're going to see is a lot more grassroots connection, people coming together for common goals, whatever they may be, and community getting more expanded with a sense of, okay, this is where we are now, so how do we come together and work with it in a way that also gives us a long view? So I think actually Tuesday into Wednesday are very, very strong days for making connections, as I said, breaking bread, anything that's related to, let's throw some ideas around together at lunch, or maybe even into dinner, or let's do a neighborhood potluck or something where people are sharing ideas in places that are comfortable and taking their time with it. So they may throw around a lot of thoughts, but there's a chewing on thought that occurs when the moon is in the sign of Taurus. These are very strong couple of days, I believe, for moving into a greater sense of community, like minds and like hearts, and where we're going next, whether it's in business, as I said, grassroots, politics, family matters, whatever the focus may be, a creative enterprise, very strong days. The moon goes void, of course, at 10:29 p.m. on Wednesday the 5th, and it enters the sign of Gemini at 1:44 a.m. So what happens at this point, and for those of you who have been paying attention to what I just said, is that moon, as it travels through the sign of Gemini, eventually is in conjunction, so in alignment with that Jupiter in Gemini. And so enthusiasm, curiosity, youthful vigor, playfulness, all these things just bounce off the walls on the 6th, which I think is fabulous. And into the 7th, Friday, here's the thing, very important to pay attention to. These ideas, when they're taking flight, need to be grounded. So you need depending on what's going on, you need a recording secretary. You need someone who is going to pull people in line and say, okay, great idea. Who volunteers to do that? And maybe even get a second, so that you have a pulling in of, it's kind of, you want to put a lid on the popcorn, because otherwise it's all over the kitchen. There's so much going on these couple of days with thoughts, ideas, declarations. The news cycle will probably be just, don't look at it too much, because whatever happens in the morning could be 180 degrees by noon. I mean, things just are so fast moving that anything of merit or worth a second look is something we want to rein in a bit. Otherwise, it will be lost in the ether. And depending on the importance of the conversation or what's going on, I mean, if you're just sitting with a group of friends and throwing ideas out, fine. But if you're working on a project or a endeavor or that needs to have follow through, the importance of logging in and making sure that data is backed up and everyone understands who's doing what. I mean, another example I think of, because my husband keeps telling me not to, but I volunteer for different groups or endeavors because I'm fairly competent, in spite of the fact that I'm not a millennial or younger, in a lot of electronic things. And so it's easy for me to do certain things that other people have no clue how to do. So what I found in one group endeavor I'm in today is that more than one of us thought we were showing up on a certain day to do an activity that just one person needs to do. And so the detail of who does it when on the calendar escaped the organizer. And that is really important to make happen if anything matters on the 6th and the 7th. Otherwise, just enjoy the pop and the volley, because there'll be a lot of it. One thing to look for, especially on Thursday, is if someone waved their hand and said, "Oh, I'll do that, I'll record, etc." Have a backup. Make sure someone else is doing that. Not to say the first person won't, but maybe some information fell through the cracks. So we want to make sure we have the right partner for whatever we're trying to make happen, especially on Thursday. And Friday morning, if that wasn't the case, or you thought someone was showing up at a certain time, or there may be some sort of miss that occurs. And if that happens, just note it, Hopefully it's not an irretrievable thing or something that's really like, oh my gosh. But don't rely on that person in the same way. Take that as a lesson. And if it was you and you forgot something, and this happens too in our very busy world. I mean, people message, they FaceTime, they WhatsApp, they text, email. There's so many ways that people. I wish there was one uniform way again. Not that I don't love all of this, I do, but it's when we get so many messages and information coming through on so many channels, depending on what's going on in our day, we can miss things. We can fail to put it in our calendar or note it down or think we heard 12:30 and it was really 10:30. So especially now that at this time when things start moving quicker, and believe me, they will, end of February into March, get in the habit of making sure, and some of you may be thinking, oh, is she talking that Mercury's retrograde? No, I'm not talking Mercury's retrograde. It's not. What I'm talking about is that there is this year is going to move so quickly in certain ways that if we're not paying attention to basically a rigorous calendar and, basically developing good communication and date keeping hygiene, we're going to be sorry about that. So I really suggest that. And anyway, so that's all I'm going to say about this at this point in time. So the moon goes void of course at 2:52 a.m. in the wee hours on Saturday. It enters the sign of Cancer at 5. Is that right? I just have to, 6:04 a.m. And it carries on through the rest of the weekend in the sign of Cancer. Once the moon's in the sign of Cancer, I feel like we're better anchored. And I think that's because the moon is in a water sign, and how it travels through the sky, it's not encountering some of the signals of confusion, mixed signal, not really looking when someone. A common phenomenon with a lot of people is they put their keys down while they're on the phone or thinking about something else, and then they can't remember where they put their keys because they didn't consciously think when they were putting them down, I'm putting my keys on top of my laptop. And they usually put them on the key ring, of course, or a place where they usually keep their keys. So that's basically Thursday, Friday. By the time we get to Saturday, Sunday, the 8th and 9th, when the moon is in the sign of Cancer, at least Eastern time, it is, as of 6:04 a.m. Saturday, then we are more in the room. We're paying attention to the pond in which we're swimming, or the ocean, or whatever's going on with our day, however big our day happens to be. We're more aware of what's around us. For some of us, especially those who have Moon Venus challenges in their horoscope, morning may feel hard. It may feel as though I'm not able to, eat the whole enchilada. Something has to, if I do that, then that has to be sacrificed. Or I would like this to happen, but my husband, my friend, my kid, they're not listening to me. They're not they're not able to meet me where I need to be. And for those of us that might be an old wound because it comes up periodically, just recognize that, oh, that's the part of me that feels like I'm not being thought of. I'm the oldest kid and I have to take care of everybody else, or I'm the youngest kid and everybody thinks I'm a drag and nobody's spending time with me. Wherever the wound comes from. And I'm joking, but sometimes it can be a lot more layered and complicated than what I just described. And so when the planets in the sky revisit this place, it can bring us back to that time, no matter how much work we've done or therapy or know ourselves. It's like, oh man, I hate when this happens or I feel this. Just note it, observe where it's coming from. There might be a lesson there. It might be, this quote friend of mine is always late, or never hears me when I say where I'd like to eat, or what movie I'd like to see. So just make note of that. It may be important to you, it may not, but it's important to make a note of it, whatever it is. And then as we get more into the afternoon, it could be a point of assessment where it's like, is this okay with me? Or is this something I really need to look at a little more deeply or express? Because it's often easier to express it and analyze it after we're past the planetary picture that feels like we're back directly in that place. And this isn't a bad thing. It really isn't, because when we have these moments, it can inform us about something. It can make us more emotionally intelligent, especially about our needs, but also recognizing how to express those needs with someone who's important to us for whatever reason. And maybe it can't be expressed. Maybe it's a situation in which we're doing some caregiving, perhaps, for a parent who no longer we would be able to have a real conversation with. But the important thing is to acknowledge it within self and then work on, how do I give myself a little more love, a little more care, a little more thoughtfulness. And that's what I actually love about this weekend as I look at it. It's, if we're paying attention to our emotional needs, but also the emotional needs of people we love and care about, the garden that we walk through, the landscape that we enjoy, the home that we are a part of, then we can make that a lovelier space by putting love into it. But only if we pass through whatever we might have to acknowledge before we get there. And so the afternoon of Saturday, again, if we're paying attention and want to get our emotional education and grow more, it looks like a wonderful afternoon, evening to me, as does Sunday the 9th. And the 9th looks particularly lovely mid-afternoon on. We're in this very nice zone of growth. So, as I said, emotional growth, start a project that you really want to pour love into and receive love from. It's a nurturing day, and it pulls that energy of the waxing moon cycle in ways that are very powerful. So this is what I see for this week. Has some bumps in it, but overall, I think that we can really Have some lovely growth and positive energy. You have been listening to Astrology Insight Now. Please share with your friends, and if you'd like to make a donation, you can do so at astrologyinsightnow.com. Have a stellar week, and we hope to see you next time.